Hi, and welcome. Most of my life, I thought of myself as just a normal child because I thought only my parents were survivors of the Holocaust, because I felt that I was just a child and only my father, not my mother, my sister, were ever in a concentration camp. Only my father was. But in 1992, I visited Israel as a part of an international child survivor group. And a sign on the bus that we were going to be touring on really shocked me because it said, real big sign, the last witnesses to the Holocaust. I suddenly realized that I too had my life completely changed by Hitler. I attended a workshop, like a seminar or class at that gathering, and we were told the importance of telling our stories, of keeping the memories alive, and to help others to learn by never forgetting. My entire childhood was overshadowed by Hitler. He changed my life forever. This is when I began, when we came back home, when I began to compile my story and my experiences. I started by looking at souvenirs, and then I began to write down everything that I remembered and lived through. But I felt it was important to do it not as an adult looking back, but to put myself back in time and to actually feel again what happened to me through a child's eyes, the child I was then. So let me take you back long before I was born. This is what happened in Germany. In 1871, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck gave full civil rights to Jews and other minority groups as full citizens. My father was born in Berlin and traced his roots back many generations. What really shocked me was my mother traced her roots back, and she lived in southern Germany, Mannheim, and she traced her roots all the way back to the 1700s. Now, my father enlisted in World War I, and on the screen you see that the enlistment paper, and he also was decorated for bravery and got a, this is another enlistment form that even after Hitler was there, he got this and saying, you're a wonderful German, you're a wonderful citizen, so forth. My mother was a frontline volunteer nurse, and I think I have the picture, by the way, of the Iron Cross that my father got. And that main one is in the museum. But my mother, on the other hand, was a volunteer frontline nurse, like the German Red Cross. My sister was born in 1922, and we had a very, very good life. I'll show you now, there's a picture of my sister, and I think you must be getting from a church or a synagogue or a school. You know what it's like when an organization sends a bulletin, right? This was a bulletin from the temple, that synagogue my sister went, and the one gal up there is my sister, and it says the beautiful Jewish child. It's amazing that I still have that. Now, we lived in an elevator apartment building, which was unusual for that time. Now there's many of them. My father had his own business, and you can see strangely that he has the funny little Hitler mustache that we all make fun of. But before Hitler came to power, that was the fashion. Soon after, he shaved that off. He had a plumbing and supply business. I was born just before Hitler came to power. There were more than 2 candidates, so he was elected by a mere 1/3 of the people because the vote was split. It's a frightening thought. Hitler made promises, economic improvements, jobs for all Germans and not foreigners, and plenty of food for all, because that had been a time where a whole wheelbarrow full of money was needed to buy a loaf of bread. So everyone wanted the improvements, and even some Jews, with everything starting, voted for him because they figured this is going to end, it doesn't affect us. My father was a veteran, they were loyal Germans, this craziness will stop. The first book burning, and I think there's a family picture, yes. The first book burning was in 1933. The first anti-Jewish activity was against 40,000 Eastern European Jews, foreigners, and gypsies. My father, as I told you, was a veteran and loyal, so he was really sure nothing would happen to us. Then in 1933, there was a law against overcrowding of German schools. And I went to a wonderful school, and I think there's a picture of it, which looks old-fashioned today, but it was a brochure, and in those days it was pretty modern. It was a school that had, from the first grade, which I was by that time, all the way through high school, which my sister was. So that's where we went. Now, when I was 5 years old, we knew that there was going to be a candlelight parade. Now, I told you we lived in an elevator building, and looking down over the porch, you could see the main street where the parade would be. And what happened was, and I will quote you in my words, not as the old lady sitting here, but as the 7-year-old child that was there when this happened. I'll quote you from the book I wrote. Gemütlich, cozy, warm, cuddly close. This is how I felt in our brightly lit kitchen, and it was as if it was intimate and the atmosphere was new, and I thought it was meant for only us, and the door was closed because there would be special secrets between Mutti, that's Mom, Papa, my dad, my sister, and me. Everyone was whisper quiet. I giggled, and everyone went, shh, and closed the kitchen door. And I still thought, was this a game? There were noises right outside our door, the kitchen door, in our living room. Why weren't we out there too? Fast, very fast. When no one was looking at me, I dashed out the door. There in the living room and on our porch were tall men, all dressed alike, with big smiles and loud laughter. This was fun, I thought, a party. Before I could run and get Mutti, Papa, and Ruth, my sister's strong hands grabbed me roughly and pulled me back into the kitchen. I said, look at the shiny boots the men are wearing. Look at all the uncles. I called all male friends of my parents uncle, and my mother's female friends, I called them aunts. So I said, look at all the handsome uncles with their shiny, shiny boots. And so my sister grabbed me roughly and pulled me back into the kitchen. I said, look, come, I yelled loudly. Ruth said shh again with a face so serious that I didn't say another word. I just took my sketchbook from her and began in the kitchen drawing the red, white, and black design on the arms of all the good men in our house. I held out my arm with my sketchbook and I said, see what I drew? Ruth, my sister, grabbed my drawing and changed the design to a window. It was like a swastika. She made a square around it and put curtains and a sill, and she made it into a window. And she told me, never draw that again. And for once, I listened to my big sister. Now, Kristallnacht was November 9th, 1938, when businesses were destroyed, thousands of men were taken away, and many temples were burned. This is a picture of the temple that my family and I went to in 1871 when it was started. We went to in the late 1900s. And this is how it looked when it burned. Now, I used to think that this was the ashes I saw because the night after Kristallnacht, on the way to school, from an L platform, I saw the ashes of a smashed, ruined temple. It wasn't this temple, but gives you an idea. This temple made it through the middle of the war and then was bombed, and that's when the fire was. So it became very difficult to leave the country because by this time my parents realized this is no longer for us. And my school was taken away. They used the school, since for its day it was very modern, they used it for a Nazi camp, and it never became a school. To this day, there is a plaque there saying a school once stood here. It became very, very difficult to leave the country. No country would take us. Rules for immigrants got stricter and stricter, and every time we handed in a paper, they wanted another proof, another affidavit. We were forced to sell our store. Now, the sale looked real because it was a piece of paper, stamped on it, sold. We got nothing for it, but that's how they took the business of the Jewish people away. Excuse me. So another thing. Now, a lot of you probably have seen or read the book, The Story of Anne Frank. I always felt a very close kinship with her, and I'll tell you why. She was 5 years older than me, but she was also a child in Europe in the Holocaust. So this is what I thought. There weren't many fun things going on anymore. We didn't drive or go to family picnics like we used to. We didn't have company anymore either, and I used to love when Mutti Papa used to have friends over because they often brought their kids and I had someone to play with. I liked that. It was very surprising when after many, many weeks, boring with nothing happening, Mutti, Papa, Ruth and I took a train to Amsterdam, Holland on a Sunday afternoon. I thought, what a good surprise. Now, Amsterdam was different from anything that I had ever seen before. Imagine a river, the canal, going right along the main street of a big city. We were going to visit a cousin named Lily. As we walked along toward her house, Papa, my daddy, sang, "Lily gain, Essen gain," which means go to Lily's, go to eat, because he told me that they would be having afternoon coffee and tea, and there'd be all kinds of sweets, and I was going to meet my cousin Lily, who I'd never met before. I don't remember too much about what was said at that visit, but there are several things that even after all these years stand out in my mind. It was a small light gray house that Cousin Lily lived in, and we climbed up a winding staircase to her apartment. She greeted us, and we were served afternoon coffee for the adults and wonderful sweets, and I had milk, and my father did this one thing, and I remember that so clearly, and it's inconsequential. He took a sugar cube, because very often, instead of granulated sugar for the coffee, they had little sugar cubes. And he had this game with me. He used to take the sugar cube, dip it in the coffee, and then give it to me. And I remember him doing that. There was much being said that I didn't understand, conversations that were in the same hushed, quiet tones, not meant for my ears, like was happening at home. I was getting used to that. But I do remember our cousin saying to my mother, "Why don't you leave Ruth and Lilo with us until the war is over? They will be safe with us. You can come and get them when this all ends." I strained to listen for my parents' answer, and after a long time, Mutti, my mom, was the first to speak. She said something like, "Thank you, dear cousin, but Ruth and Lilo will stay with us. We will take our chances together." And I've always wondered what would have happened if Mutti and Papa had accepted Cousin Lily's offer, because Cousin Lily was killed along with her whole family by the Nazis. And still I remember my daddy's song, Papa singing, "Lily's gain, Essen gain." Shortly thereafter, my father was told to report with a suitcase to the train station, and he was picked up by the Gestapo and sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which was a concentration camp near Berlin. And this is a strange thing, because this, imagine from a concentration camp, it's like having a vacation picture postcard. This was a card sent by my father, and on the one side there are rules of when mail can be written, when it can be done, and my father's bunk number and number. In the early days then, they didn't yet put the brand names or tattoo them on his arm. He was lucky with that. And because it was in the very beginning, he was able to buy his way out after several months, which was very unusual. And they said, if we find you in Berlin in the next 2-3 weeks, you won't be so lucky. So get out and don't come back. My father was able to immigrate to Kitchener Camp. It was a work camp not far from London, Richborough, Kent, for men with no country. It's a work camp set up where men with no visas were able to stay, because otherwise he couldn't have gone out of the country. In September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and at that time, Poland and England and France declared war on Germany. And then I began to wonder, because once we were at war, we couldn't communicate with my father because England and Germany were at war. We were in one country and he was in the other. And I was thinking, I wonder if he's still alive. And that's, as a child, when I really began to realize that we were all in danger. We moved to a less conspicuous, smaller apartment. I think there were 6 of us together, several families, with my aunt and 2 other women, and I think there were like 6 of us altogether, or 8. Now, next you'll see there's a registration form, and also after that, there is a form that my mother had to carry around for identification. And all the names are there. So even though the police and the Nazis knew where we were, it was in hiding from the general public. And then something very interesting happened. I never had a middle name. I mean, my German name was long enough. It was Lieselotte, for short is Lilo, and my maiden name was Klopstock. So that's a very, very long name. My parents didn't give me a middle name, and I thought it was, gee, this is fun. Now we all have a middle name. All the Jewish men had to use the middle name Israel to identify them when they showed their ID papers, and all the Jewish women had to put Sarah, S-A-R-A. And not knowing why and what this was happening at first, I thought, great, I finally have a middle name. Our school that I told you was taken away. We then went to different schools. My sister went to a Goldschmidt school, which was for children her age, and I went to Klopstock School, which I thought, my goodness, I'm a big shot. It's a school in my name. Well, the name Klopstock, although we weren't related, was a name from a very, very famous centuries ago poet. And somehow we had gotten that name, but we were not related. Once on that school, we were excused early. We weren't told why, we were just told go home. But I thought, gee, this is a chance to play. And so a couple of my friends, I said, hey kids, let's go play all the way home and not go home like we're supposed to, and not go home until we're supposed to. Pretty soon, we heard laughing and jeering and voices. My friends, who I can't picture, I don't even know who they were. That I don't remember. The rest of it is like today. There were some young boys, a whole troop of them, about the age of Boy Scouts that you see here, and they had the short pants and the shirts, and they were laughing and running. And suddenly, they grabbed me, pushed me to the ground, pulled my braids, and said, dirty Jew girl abroad, go home where you want to. And luckily, they were laughing, and I was able to get away. And I ran all the way home, and boy, I never did that again. And I think there's a picture of me there. Am I right? Yeah, although that's not to be talked about yet. Anyway, food was scarce. Now, some of you, I'm sure at home, the parents have brought home one of those chickens that you buy in the grocery store, all cooked. Well, one of those had to last 6 of us 1 week. That's how scarce food was. And my Aunt Hannah, who I was as close to as my mother, or even closer, suddenly she left. And that's when I began to sit and wonder. I was lying in a bed where there was no heat anymore in our apartment, and thinking, will we ever get out? Everyone's left me. My daddy, my Aunt Hannah. Now, one good thing with my aunt getting out, and a second good thing, because the most important thing is that she was saved. She got out. She came to America, where I have an uncle. She was able to take, and that's why I have pictures to show you, and some of the stuff that otherwise people don't have. She was able to take a Jew crate, they called it. It was actually an actual shipping crate like you see on ships that then go in trucks through the city. And she was able to take some of our things. Jewels and stuff like that, a lot of it was taken, but precious is the thing that I have these pictures and some of these documents to always remember. They called it in the shipping business a Jew crate. There were air raids started, which also scared me, and I told you no heat in our apartment. Now, the regular people in the apartment sat in a back part of the basement that was like an air raid shelter. We Jewish people had to sit in the front near the entrance. It wasn't really protected. We were just a floor down from our apartment. And then I began to think, as the bombs came and then the planes left and nothing hit our place, I was thinking, oh my gosh, now the German planes are going to England. I wonder if they'll bomb my daddy. I hope we're all right. And then there were more and more obstacles, as I told you. It was so difficult to get visas, long lines. We were spit at, long lines. I remember standing on a staircase going down, and on every floor that we went by, there was a Nazi sitting at a desk spitting at us or calling us names. And by that time, I knew that when my mother or my sister looked at me with that stern face, I couldn't be my normal bratty self. I learned to be quiet, that we were in danger. Now, lifelong friends of my mother's and my father's, but this woman went to school with my mom, they were attorneys. And the Nazis started a Judenrat, which is a bureau where Jews worked in the office for them trying to get Jews out, so they were trying to help. Now, I found out later that our quota, our number when we could be getting a visa to America, was 3,048 or something like that. We would never have made it. But these friends of ours, they changed our numbers somehow, and we were free. And what you see up there is a picture of me and my pass and my visa to the United States. And it was the most exciting day, except I was petrified when I had to write my own name. You can see the shaky handwriting because we had to sign it with some Nazis standing over us, and I just was petrified. After the war, and I think that's the next one, there's a telegram we got about our good friends that helped us and so many others, and it said, Mr. and Mrs. Hedwig Strauss went to Auschwitz, probably gassed. And that was the last of our friends. You saw my visa, and I think next is my passport with a red J on it. And I remember, as I said, signing these things. And the next few pictures are pictures of the ship we went. But let me go back a minute first. Before we got on the ship, there was a friend of the family, a woman who also helped my mother with some house cleaning and stuff, Mrs. Friebe. I remember her. We were able to leave, but with only $4 a person. Everything else was confiscated. And there was no trace of Mrs. Friebe. She helped us sneak out after curfew, after 8 o'clock on a weekday night, and get us on the train that we took to Italy. We missed being picked up, we heard later, by 20 or 30 minutes. We had just made it out. Now, there was a drunken SS man, and there were Nazis that were Italian soldiers. I didn't know, but my sister told, and she was next to me, and we were so lucky that he was drunk because she was 17 years old and a very pretty young girl, but we made it carefully. To Genoa, Italy, a small, dirty little hotel, even had bugs, but we were so happy we were free. There was the boat Conte di Savoia, and the next 3 or 4 slides show you pictures. It looks old-fashioned now, but it was very modern for its day. But having no money to come out with, we were in the 3rd class, the deepest, rickety part of the ship. We left on January 16th of 1940 through mined waters, Straits of Gibraltar. We knew no English. I mean, I knew no English. My mother and father had learned some English before the war. They used to have a man who was from Britain come and teach them, but not my sister or I. And we left on the 26th, as I said, and we arrived in New York February 1st. But I even had fun on the ship, as kids can. I met other kids on the ship. I don't know if we all spoke the same languages or not, but the captain would turn the other cheek and didn't look, and we snuck every afternoon into seeing a free movie on the ship. And that's how I learned my first English, from Hollywood movies. When we arrived in New York, it was a rainy day. When we were checked in, we went to a delicatessen, and there were no delicatessens anymore in Germany, especially none with kosher-type food. My mother holding the umbrella, my sister and I, both under the umbrella, had bought a big chunk of salami and a piece of chocolate cake, and we were eating this. And suddenly, you know, we were happy and free. The Hebrew Immigration Society put us up for that night. Another girlfriend of my mother's, we were able to see her and my uncle who was in New York, and then we took a train to Chicago. We were reunited with my father not until March 27th of 1940, but of course the minute we got to New York, we were able to call and find out, yes, he was alive. And then next, I think there's a telegram, and that says, Norbert Klopstock arriving, such and such, meet him at Randolph Street Station. I think there's still a Greyhound bus line there. But being a newcomer in a new country was rather difficult for me, because children that scared me as much as anybody, Boy Scouts, I was afraid. I thought this was the Hitler Youth again, but I didn't see them often. And it was explained this was something different. But the children in my class, and I was put up to 4th grade because I had missed a year, and I was bumped up a year because of the education I had. But being a newcomer in wartime, kids beat me up, and everyone, and I would fall for this all the time. They'd say, come with me, we'll be your friend. And they'd beat me up until I ran home and say, Hitler's daughter, go back where you came from, because I had an accent. And maybe that's why I worked so hard that I don't have one now. I just wanted to be American. But it was scary to have that kind of thing growing up. But I was always thankful. And I close my story with reading to you what I wrote in my book, because if I set it off my chest, I think I break up each time. But this is how I feel. I was so unbelievably lucky that it has left me forever with a heavy burden of guilt. Guilty for the astounding reality of having escaped while those around me and 1.5 million children did not escape. I'll forever wonder why, and if there's not some unfulfilled task for me to do that would explain my being alive while those like me are not alive. I always look for some assignment, some task or deed that will fulfill this need. Now, my story is intended to show the effect that one man had over my life, a man elected by a mere 30% of the German population. Undoubtedly, his counterpart will be lurking again in our future. That's what I said when I wrote this, but we know darn well in the world now there are counterparts just like him lurking, which is sad that all that happened and it hasn't changed the world. But we here must be aware that it could happen anywhere and even here to anyone. We must always be alert and never be complacent and accept people for who they are, not what they are. Thanks.